Hello, bruvs. We're back with Alraune by Heinz Ewers, a 1929 translation of the earlier text by S. Guy Indore, illustrated by Melon Blaine. We're on channel 7, channel 7, chapter 7, and let's begin. I think I'm going to have to turn on my light, and it's still awful. Maybe I'll just turn on the light in the room. Light on is on. Let's see if that does anything. Yeah, kind of. Chapter 7, which informs the reader of what happened while Alraune was a little girl. This is not very good light. Let's see if I can move over, make it better. From her 8th year into her 12th, Alraune was brought up in the Sacre Coeur convent at Nancy. And from then on until she reached the age of 17, she boarded at Mille de Vinteline's select school for young ladies on the Avenue du Marteau in Spa. Twice a year during this part of her life, she came home to the Ten Brinken house in Ledinick to spend her vacation. The Privy Councillor had first attempted to have her educated at home. He hired a governess to train the child a little, and then a male teacher, and soon thereafter another, but they all gave up in despair after very short attempts, declaring that with the best intentions in the world there was simply nothing to be accomplished with such a child. Oh no, she wasn't naughty, not in the least wild or refractory. She just wouldn't answer a body. You simply couldn't bring her to say anything at all. Calmly, she sat there, stubborn and quiet, and blinked straight ahead through her half closed eyes. It was impossible to say whether she was listening or not. She would take her slate pencil in her hand, but no amount of coaxing would persuade her to exercise upstrokes or downstrokes, and the formation of whole letters was altogether out of the question. If she used her slate at all, it was to draw some monstrous beast with 10 legs, or a face with 3 eyes and 2 noses. All the actual learning she absorbed before the Privy Councillor sent her to the convent was derived from her association with Wolfchen. He himself failed in every class. He was excessively lazy when it came to schoolwork, and looked down with scorn on everything pertaining to school. But at home he exercised endless patience in teaching his little sister. She took a devilish delight in making him write out his name and her name hundreds of times, and she had him write column after column of figures, while her watchful eye lit up with pleasure whenever his dirty little fingers failed him, or whenever his wrists began to sting him like pins and needles, and it was only to make him slave that she herself took up a pencil and learned with startling speed to cipher and spell, for then she could impose upon the little fellow. She would make him copy her work hour after hour, and no matter how diligently he sweated over his slate, she always had some objection to make. This or that little stroke wasn't quite right, and she would make him do it over again. She played the teacher, and thus she learnt. Then one day the principal made a trip to Ledinich to complain to the Privy Councillor that Wolfchen was very poor in geography and history. I wonder if I tilted this, it'd make a difference. No, if I tilt it that way, it makes somewhat of a difference. To Alraune this furnished an added means of ruling over the lad. From now on she played school with him in earnest. She planned his work, heard his lessons, and punished him if he failed to accomplish the tasks she had set. Let's check and see. No, nothing's going to make this brighten up. It's too bright outside. She planned his work, heard his lessons, and punished him if he failed to accomplish the task she had set. She would shut him up in his room and would not let him out until he knew everything thoroughly. And meanwhile she acted as though she had known it all along. Never for a moment did she allow him to doubt her superiority. She was very quick to grasp anything, and in order that the lad might lack of knowledge in her, she took to reading one book after another. Her mind seized upon facts helter skelter. with neither order nor connection, pardon. Still it came to the point where Wolfchen would come to her when he did not know the answer to some question, and he was fully convinced that she must surely know it. She would put him off, chiding him for not knowing so simple a matter, and urge him to reflect. Thus she gained time to casually look through the books, and if she could not manage to find her way out, she would run off to ask the privy councillor. Then she would return to the boy and innocently ask him if the answer had not yet occurred to him. Then finally she would settle his difficulty. The professor noticed her little game, and it amused him considerably. He would never have conceived the idea of sending her away to school if it had not been for the Duchess. She had always been a good Catholic, but in the last years she seemed to add a new measure of piety. Pound of flesh she took on. This is Alraune by Heinz Ewers. And she did not cease to urge upon the privy councillor the advisability of having the girl brought up in a convent. Indeed, as Alraune's godmother, she insisted upon it, and the councillor, who for some years now had been functioning as her financial adviser and working with her millions as if they were his own, deemed it wise to humor her in this small matter. Thus, Alraune was sent to the Sacré-Cœur convent. Besides several short entries in the professor's handwriting, the leather-bound volume contains, for this period, some rather lengthy reports from the Mother Superior. The professor grinned as he fastened them into the book, especially when he came across some phrases of praise commenting upon the extraordinary progress that his child was making. Oh, he knew these convents well and realized fully that there was no place on earth where one learned less than among these pious sisters. And it amused him to note how the usual flattering reports which all parents receive at first soon changed in Alraune's case to continuously sharper and more moving complaints regarding the girl's cruelty. And all of these complaints arose from the same ground. The behavior of the child and her scholastic accomplishments were always adequate, but it seemed that she exercised the most evil influence upon her schoolmates. True enough, the Reverend Mother wrote, she herself never tortures any animals. At any rate, if she does, she has managed never to be caught at it, but it is nevertheless well established that all the various little acts of cruelty which other girls have committed originated in her head. The first case was that of little Mary, a really good and obedient child, who was caught in the act of blowing up frogs with hollow glass stems. When cross-examined, she confessed that Alraune had suggested the idea to her. There she is, blowing up frogs. I guess you could do that if you put a glass tube in the frog's mouth. At first, we refused to believe this. We considered it as more than likely an excuse to shoulder a part of the blame upon someone else. But very shortly thereafter, two girls were discovered sprinkling salt on slugs, so that these poor animals, who are, after all, God's creatures too, dissolved into slime in the midst of the most painful contortions. And here again the two children insisted that Alraune had urged them on to it. Now I myself determined to question her, and your child declared boldly that she had heard of this once before, and had wished to see if it were really so. She even admitted her complicity in the matter of the frogs. She said that the blown-up beasts exploded with a beautiful pop when smashed with a stone. Of course, she herself would not do it, because a bit of the crushed frog might squirt onto her hands. When asked if she recognized and acknowledged her sinfulness, she replied that she hadn't done anything, and that what other children did could not possibly concern her. At this point, there is a marginal note made by the counselor, which runs thus: she is absolutely right. Despite repeated punishment, the letter continues, Alraune was soon again perceived as the origin of some other very sad events. For example, Clara Masson of Durin, a girl a few years older than Alraune, who has been in our care for the last 4 years, and so far had never given us the slightest cause, there's the Mother Superior, for complaint. heated the end of a knitting needle to a glow, and then gouged out the eyes of a mole. She herself was so upset by the deed that for the next few days before confession, she evinced extreme internal agitation and for no apparent reason repeatedly burst into tears. She did not calm down until she had confessed and received absolution. Alraune declared upon this occasion that moles creep around in the dark earth, and it doesn't matter whether they can see or not. Then we found most ingeniously contrived bird traps set out in the garden. Luckily, the little bird netters had not caught yet. When questioned, the children would not at first admit who was responsible for the notion, and it was not until we threatened them with dire punishment that they confessed that Alraune had enticed them into it and had warned them to beware of her revenge if they dared reveal her complicity. And unfortunately, her evil influence upon her schoolmates has grown so enormously of late that it is becoming impossible to get at the truth. Thus, the sister in charge of recess caught Helene Petia in the act of catching flies whose wings she carefully removed with a pair of shears, and whose legs she tore out one by one, finally throwing their crippled bodies into an ant heap. The little girl, however, would not alter her story that she had thought up the idea herself, and even when confronted by his reverence the bishop, insisted that Alraune had nothing to do with it. In a similarly stubborn fashion, her cousin Ninan denied that Alraune had set her to tying a tin kettle to the tail of our pet house cat so that the poor old beast nearly went out of his mind. Nevertheless, we are convinced that Alraune was somehow involved in these two affairs also. The Mother Superior wrote further that she had called a conference and that it had been decided to beg His Excellency to please remove his daughter from the convent just as soon as he possibly could. The Privy Councillor answered that he regretted these occurrences extremely, but that for the nonce he must beg them to allow Alraune to remain where she was. Besides, would not the reward... Hey, look, the light improved. Besides, would not the reward be greater the harder the task was? He, for his part, did not doubt that the patience and piety of the sisters would eventually succeed in weeding out the badness in the heart of his child and in converting it into a fertile garden of the Lord. What he really wanted to discover was whether the influence of the delicate girl would prevail over all the discipline of the convent and all the efforts of the sisters. He knew very well that the best families did not go to the rather cheap convent of Sacré-Cœur in Nancy, and that the sisters ought to be glad to number the daughter of an excellency among their students, and he was not mistaken. The Mother Superior answered that with God's help they would try again, and that all the sisters had declared themselves willing to include a special plea for Alraune in their evening prayers, whereupon the Privy Councillor in a burst of generosity sent them 100-mark bill for their charities. During the following vacation, the professor watched his little girl and Wolfchen very carefully. He knew the Gontram family from their great-grandfather down, and he knew that love for animals was one of the things they absorbed, along with their mother's milk. Now, despite the influence which Alraune exercised over the much older lad, she would certainly be stopped by that unlimited kindness which innately characterized the Gontrams. One afternoon, nevertheless, he surprised Wolfchen Gontram kneeling on the earth underneath the snakewood tree by the side of the pond. A huge frog sat on a stone in front of him. The boy had stuck a burning cigarette in its broad mouth, deep down into its gullet, and the frog, frightened to death, smoked away for all it was worth. A little of the smoke was swallowed at each breath and went into its belly, from which it could not be ejected, so that the poor beast grew larger and larger. Wolfchen stared at it with eyes overflowing with tears, and yet when the one cigarette had burnt down, he lit a second one, and with trembling fingers removed the old butt and pushed the freshly lit cigarette into its mouth. And the frog swelled up into a monstrous bloated beast, its big eyes pushed up out of their hollows. It was a strong frog and could stand 2.5 cigarettes before it burst. The boy cried out with pain as though his sufferings were greater than those of the creature he was torturing to death. He started back and would have fled into the bushes, but when he caught sight of the torn frog still moving in its welter, he ran up to it and with mad despair crushed it again and again with his heel in order to kill it and free it from its misery. The privy councillor seized the boy by the ear and began by examining his pockets. Several other cigarettes were there, and the boy confessed having taken them from the desk in the library. But he could not be moved to answer who had told him, or how he had discovered that smoking frogs will blow themselves up until they burst. No amount of urging would make him reply, and the generous beating which the professor ordered the gardener to administer failed likewise. Alraune, too, denied everything stubbornly, even after one of the maids declared that she had seen the little girl taking the cigarettes. The two children stuck to their stories, he that he had stolen the cigarettes, and she that she had done nothing whatsoever. Alraune remained at Nancy still one more year, and then she was suddenly sent home, in the very middle of the term. This time the nuns were certainly at fault. Only the superstitious sisters could have believed her guilty, although even the privy councillor had a faint suspicion. But no really logical mind could seriously accuse her of such a crime. Once before Sacre-Cœur had suffered an epidemic, measles on that occasion. 75 little girls had lain in their cots, and but a few, among them Alraune, had remained healthy. This time the disease was of a more serious nature, namely typhus fever. 8 children and 1 nun died of it. But Alraune ten Brinken had never been in such good health. She positively blossomed out, took on weight, and ran gaily through the rooms full of patients. And since no one took any notice of her during those weeks, she ran upstairs and downstairs from one bed to another and told the children that they were all to die. In fact, not later than tomorrow, and then they would all go to hell. Only she, Alraune, would live on until she went to heaven. She distributed holy images and urged the sick girls to pray to Mother Mary and to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. But she warned them that it would do them no good, because they would have to burn anyhow. They would have to stew forever, and it was simply astonishing how realistically she could paint the tortures of hell. Occasionally, when in a good mood, she would be lenient. Then she promised the girls no more than 100 years in the cleansing flames of purgatory. But even that was pretty bad for the sick minds of the pious little girls. The doctor simply threw her out of the room without asking any questions, and the nuns, absolutely convinced that she had drawn the sickness into the convent, packed her off with her bag and baggage. The report tickled the professor so that he laughed out loud, and his good humor did not abate, even when 2 of his maids contracted typhus shortly after Alraune came home, and died soon thereafter in the hospital. He did not, however, write an angry letter to the Mother Superior at Nancy. Is that how you say the word? Is it Nancy, like the name? Complaining bitterly that she had sent Alraune home at a time when conditions were such as they were. He refused to pay the outstanding account for the tuition of the last semester, and energetically insisted upon being reimbursed for the expenses he had incurred for the 2 sick maids. And of course, he was right from a sanitary point of view. The sisters of Sacre-Cœur should not have acted as they did. In truth, His Excellency did not act any differently. He was not actually afraid of the danger of contagion, yet, like all doctors, he preferred to observe sickness in others rather than himself. He kept Alraune in Lendennick only until he found out the name of some good finishing schools. And so it was that within 4 days of her return, the silent Aloysius accompanied her to the famous Institute of Mille di Ventilin in Spa. The journey was without incident as far as the child was concerned, but the servant had 2 little adventures to report. On the trip to Spa, he found a pocketbook containing some pieces of silver, and on his return he crushed his finger while closing the ventilator. The privy councillor nodded with approval when Aloysius made his report to him. The privy councillor's knowledge of events during Alraune's year at Spa was derived from the loquacious Fräulein Becker, the German instructress who came originally from Cologne and still spent her vacations there. From the very first day of her stay in the old building on the Avenue du Marteau, Alraune had begun to exercise her dominion and had extended it not only over her comrades, but also over her teachers, and in particular over the English miss, who in a very few weeks was reduced to an obedient creature in the hands of Alraune, a mere toy without any will of her own, and ready to serve Alraune's silliest and wildest whim. Thus, on the very first day at breakfast, Alraune had declared that she did not like either honey or marmalade, and demanded butter. Of course, Mille de Vintelen did not give her any. But within a few days, some of the other girls began to crave butter, and finally a loud cry for butter went up from every one in the school. Even Miss Patterson, who had never had anything but toast with jam with her morning tea, suddenly experienced an uncontrollable desire for butter, so that the principal felt compelled to yield to the enormous demand. Alraune, however, seemed suddenly to have acquired a preference for orange marmalade. As far as torturing animals was concerned, Fraulein Becker said in reply to the Privy Councillor's particular questioning that she had never heard of anything of the like during these years at the Vintelen school. If any such thing had taken place, it had remained undiscovered. On the other hand, Alraune had made life miserable for the other children, as well as for the teachers, both male and female, and especially for the poor music teacher. The latter was accustomed to leave his snuff-box outside on the mantel in the hall in order that he might not succumb to the temptation of using it during class, and ever since Alraune's entrance the most remarkable objects turned up in the snuff-box. For example, fat spiders and woodlice, gunpowder, pepper, writing and thick with ink, and once even chopped up 1,000 legs. Several girls were caught at it and punished, but Alraune's connection, though suspected, was never proved. She did, however, maintain a passive resistance toward the old musician. She sat during class with her hands in her lap, and never once would she play for him. Finally, the professor went in despair to complain to the principal. She called Alraune down, but the latter insisted calmly that the old gentleman was a liar. Mille de Vintelen, I can't say it. It's always Vintelen felt conscious bound to attend the next class personally, and lo and behold, the little girl knew her lesson perfectly, even better than any other girl, and gave every evidence of an astounding ability. Mille de Vintelen broke out into bitter reproaches toward the music teacher, who could only stand there repeating, "Mais c'est incroyable, mais c'est vraiment incroyable." Sure, that's absolutely botched. Whereupon he was at once dubbed Monsieur Incroyable by all the little ladies of the school, and they never called him anything else. They would shout it after him wherever he went, pronouncing it as though they too had no more teeth in their mouths. As far as Miss Patterson was concerned, she never had another calm day in her life until she left the school. She was the victim of one stupid trick after another. One day she complained that someone had strewn her bed with itch powder, and the next day after a picnic she found half a dozen fleas in her bed. Then again it was the key to her desk or to her room that was missing, or else when she was just about to put on her dress she discovered that someone had ripped off all the hooks and eyes. On one occasion, effervescent powder in her vase de nuit went into sudden activity and frightened her to death, and on still another night burning moths fluttered into her room through an open window so that she shouted for help. Now it was her chair that she found too late was smeared with paint or glue, and then it was a mouse or a chicken's head that her hand encountered when she went for her handkerchief, and so on until the poor miss was afraid to move. Upon examination, some girl or other was found out and punished, but Alraune never, although every one was firmly persuaded that she was the brains of the whole business. The only one who rejected this suspicion with indignation was the Englishwoman herself, who continued to swear by the child's innocence until the very day she left the Institute Vintilen, that hellhole, as she described it, where lived only one single sweet angel. The professor grinned as he noted on the margin that sweet angel is Alraune. Now, as far as she herself was concerned, Fraulein Becker continued, she had, at the very start, avoided the strange child. This had not been very hard, since she dealt principally with the French and English girls, and she instructed Alraune only in calisthenics and sewing. Indeed, as far as sewing went, Alraune displayed at once such a distaste for it and so little talent that she had secured her a special dispensation permitting her to be absent from that class. In calisthenics she gave evidence of much skill, and so Fraulein Becker pretended not to notice her pranks. Only once, and that was soon after Alraune's entrance, did she have an encounter with the girl, and here she had to confess to having been worsted. She had overheard Alraune during a free period telling her comrades about her stay in the convent. The little girl related on one hand that everything there was marvelous and beautiful, and on the other hand she accused the nuns of every kind of crime, not forgetting murder. The whole concoction that she had plainly just invented as she went along was characterized by such effrontery, such lying and boasting, that she, Fraulein Becker, had felt it her duty to interpose, especially since she herself had been brought up by the Sacre Coeur at Nancy, and knew that the place was most modest and humble, and the sisters the most harmless creatures in the world. She therefore called Alraune to her desk, upbraided her for telling such horrible lies, and then ordered her peremptorily to tell her classmates that she had lied. When Alraune stubbornly refused to apologize, Fraulein Becker declared that she would herself go tell them. Whereupon Alraune rose on her toes and looked at her calmly and quietly said, "If you do that, Fraulein, then I'll tell everyone that your mother is a cheesemonger and keeps a little cheese shop." Fraulein Becker had to confess that she had in a moment of weakness surrendered to a false shame and given in to the child. She added, however, that there had been such deliberation in the girl's low voice that she had taken fright and gone to her room feeling happy that she had at least avoided an open quarrel with the little creature. Besides, she had soon enough receive I think that's just misspelled. Besides, she had soon enough received her merited punishment for having denied her mother. Alraune told everyone about her mother's cheese shop, anyhow, and it had required much pain and much patience on Fraulein Becker's part to recapture the respect which she had thereby lost throughout the school. What's wrong with running a cheese shop? But the teachers suffered only slightly compared to the students themselves. They were indeed there was indeed not a single girl in the school who had not suffered at her hands, and curiously, with every new misdeed, her reputation and her popularity rose. True, the momentary victim might be enraged, but all the other girls were on Alraune's side. Fraulein Becker had any number of stories to tell the privy councillor, and he entered some of the worst into the leather-bound volume. Blanche de Bonneville had just returned from a vacation spent among her relatives in Picardy, where the poor hot-blooded girl, only 14 years of age, had fallen head over heels in love with a cousin who was not much older than she. She wrote to him from Spa, and the young fellow answered her, addressing his letters BDB, Poste Restante. Then he no doubt found a better way to waste his time. At any rate, no more letters were received. She had shared her secret only with her two best friends, Alraune and little Louison. Of course, Blanche was extremely sad and cried all night long, while Louison sat by her side and sought to comfort her. Alraune, however, declared that it was wrong to soothe her. Her cousin had been unfaithful to her. He had betrayed her trust, and now there was nothing but for Blanche to die of unrequited love. That was the only way really to bring home to the false lover the criminality of his actions. All through his after life he would be pursued and tortured by the Furies. She knew a great number of famous examples where this had taken place. Blanche agreed as far as the dying was concerned, but she simply would not pine away. Despite her sorrow, even her appetite hadn't failed, and so Alraune declared that since her blasted love did not suffice to slay her, it was her duty to provide some other means than that of a broken heart. How about a dagger or a pistol? There was none at hand, and Blanche simply refused to use a hatpin or jump out of the window. She'd be willing enough to swallow something, she declared, and at once Alraune came to her help. In Mille de Vintilan's medicine chest was a bottle of Lysol, and so Louison was sent to steal it. Unfortunately, there were but a few drops left. It seemed advisable then to add something, so Louison was put to work scratching off the phosphorus heads from several boxes of matches. Blanche wrote a number of farewell letters to her parents, to the principal, to her false lover. Then she drank down the Lysol and swallowed the match heads, both of which tasted terribly. In order to make the job a good one, Alraune had her swallow 3 packages of needles in addition. Jesus. Alraune herself, be it observed, was not present at the actual attempt. Under the pretext of watching, she left and went to her own room, not, however, before she had made Blanche swear by the crucifix to follow all directions with great care. So that evening little Louison sat on her friend's bed and amid sobs and tears handed Blanche first the Lysol, then the phosphorus, and finally the little envelopes of needles. Blanche soon began to feel ill under the influence of this threefold poison. She turned from side to side and cried out with pain. Louison joined in until the whole house re-echoed, and then she ran out of the room and fetched the head mistress and the teachers, and stuttered that Blanche was dying. Blanche de Banville did not die. A capable doctor administered a sharp emetic that brought up not only the Lysol and the phosphorus, but also the needles. True, one of the envelopes had opened up in her stomach, and half a dozen needles had gotten lost. They wandered through her body, and as the years went by, came out in the most unexpected places, so that the young suicide was often painfully reminded of her first love. Blanche lay in bed for many days and suffered a great deal. Her punishment was deemed sufficient in itself. Everyone pitied her and was concerned about her slightest wish, but she wished nothing so much as that her friends, who had been her accomplices, should not be punished either. And she pleaded and begged so insistently that the principal finally promised to forgive everything, which is the only reason why Alraune was not thrown out of the school. The next victim was Hilda Aldekirk, who doted on the Berlin-style pancakes that were sold in the German confectionery store on the Place Royale. She averted that she could eat 20, whereupon Alraune insisted that she certainly couldn't eat 30. So they made a wager, and the loser was to pay for the cakes. Hilda Aldekirk won, but was so sick as a result that she had to stay in bed for 2 weeks. Piggy, said Alraune ten Brinken, serves you right. And all the girls now called the fat roly-poly Hilda Piggy, Piggy. She cried over the shame of such a nickname, but soon she grew accustomed to it and finally became Alraune's most faithful companion, just like Blanche de Banville. Only once, so Fraulein Becker reported, had Alraune really been seriously punished, and in view of her hundreds of misdemeanors, it seems most curious that she should then have been punished unjustly. But the statement is capable of substantiation. One night, when the moon was full, the French teacher burst from her room crying "Murder" and "Help," until the whole house was aroused. A white ghost, so she insisted, was sitting on the railing of her balcony. No one was brave enough to enter her room, so finally the porter was summoned. He armed himself with a heavy club and went to investigate. The ghost turned out to be Alraune, who was sitting there quietly with nothing on but her thin nightgown and staring at the moon. How she came there no one managed to get out of her. The principal thought this playing ghost in very bad taste indeed. It was not until much later that it developed that Alraune had most likely been under the influence of the full moon. On several other occasions thereafter she was caught sleepwalking. It was noteworthy that Alraune took her punishment without a murmur. It consisted of devoting a free afternoon to the copying of a very long chapter from Telemaque, a task which she conscientiously carried out. Nothing is more certain than that she would have rebelled indignantly against any merited sentence. Fraulein Becker said to the Privy Councillor, "I'm afraid your daughter will not be the source of much joy to you." But the Privy Councillor returned, "On the contrary, so far I am very satisfied." He did not wish Alraune to spend her last few vacations at home, so he permitted her to travel with her school friends. Once she went with Maud Macpherson to Scotland. Then she stayed for a while with Blanche's parents in Paris, and finally she went with the two Rodenburgs to the Rodenburg estate in Munster. He received no very exact reports concerning these episodes in Alrauna's life, but he could imagine them, and it was no small source of gratification to him to think how the creature he had created spread the circles of his influence over an ever widening area. In the paper he read that during the summer, which was the one Alraune had spent at Boltenhagen, the green and white colors of Count Rodenburg had come off exceedingly well on the turf, and his success there had been, of course, a highly profitable repercussion on his stud farm. Furthermore, he learned that Mille de Vintelen had inherited an unexpected fortune that put her in the position of closing her institute to new pupils, so that the school was to be continued only until all the old students had graduated. The Privy Councillor ascribed both events to the presence of Alraune, and he was half convinced that she must have brought money into the other houses where she had been, the convent at Nancy, the Reverend Macpherson's home in Edinburgh, and the Banville Hotel on the Boulevard Haussmann. Thus she paid 3 times over for her deviltries. He thought that all these people ought to be thankful to his child. He had a feeling that he had brought into the world a strange sprite and strewed roses into the life paths of people who had the luck to encounter her. But he had to laugh too as he thought of the sharp thorns on these very roses and the nice little scratches they must inflict. And he asked Fraulein Becker, "By the way, how is your dear mother getting along?" "Why, thank you, your Excellency," she answered. "Mother really has no cause to complain. In these last few years her business has improved considerably." The Privy Councillor said, "You don't say," and he ordered that in the future all the Emmenthal, Roquefort, Chester, Holland, and other cheese used in his household should be purchased at Frau Becker's shop in Munster Street. Very interesting chapter. Hey, fem shit. Hey, it's fem shit. How did you come up with that name? Isn't that like some trend or something? How long is the next chapter? 12 pages? That's not bad. I'll read that after work tonight. So Alraune is a little demon. Hello, Brobs. Are you there? So what are we? Just about halfway through now. And chapter 8. Any words? Any words? Peeps? Any words? Must plug in this phone. What time is it? What time is it, mate? Only 12:30? That's nice. I have plenty of time. Anybody? Ten Brinken. Where is it? Alive. Alive, she cried. Let's see. Click that. Check that. Everyone left. So sad. Hello, Brobs. Hell's up there in the corner? What is it, bruv? What is it? I guess no one's saying anything, so twill be all. Goodbye, Brobs. Goodbye.